They were more than just characters in a Western. They were icons of American television, men and women who carried the hopes, heartbreak, and honor of the frontier on their shoulders. The Virginian was a series that dared to be different. 90-minute episodes, a sprawling cast, and stories that cut deeper than the average gunfight. It wasn't just about good versus evil. It was about the silence between the shots, the weight behind every stare, and the code of those who lived by the saddle. But behind those unforgettable performances were real lives, messy, painful, and in many cases, quietly tragic. This isn't a glossy tribute. It's a reckoning. Charles Bickford, the hardened veteran who brought gravitas forged by real pain. J Cobb, commanding as Judge Garth, but privately worn down by a lifetime of emotional storms. Mccclure, the charming face of Trampas, masking a man slowly unraveling behind a grin. Drury, forever etched into the myth of the Virginian, who vanished from screens as quickly as he had appeared. CLU Guliger, unpredictable and electric, who found rebirth in blood-soaked horror. And Sarah Lane, the soul of Shiloh Ranch, who stepped away from the spotlight and never looked back. 6 legends, 6 final rides, each story more haunting than the last. These weren't just endings. They were erasures of actors who helped shape the golden age of television but were left behind as the world moved on. Until now. If you believe these names deserve more than fading credits, if you're drawn to the truth buried beneath the myth, subscribe to the channel. Because this isn't just nostalgia. This is the untold story of the Virginian. And it begins here. Charles Bickford, John Granger. Born January 1st, 1891. Died November 9th, 1967. When Charles Bickford stepped into the boots of John Granger in the Virginian, he brought with him more than just decades of acting experience. He brought a kind of weight that couldn't be taught. His gravel-edged voice, his commanding presence, the furrow of his brow, none of it was performance. It was life, hardened, real, and impossible to ignore. Born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the stroke of midnight on the first day of 1891, Bickford was destined to do things his own way. Before acting, he lived a dozen lives: lumberjack, sailor, business owner. He didn't arrive in Hollywood looking to be sculpted by the studio system. And when that system tried to mold him, Bickford didn't bend. That independence made him respected, but it also made his early path in film unusually turbulent. He was offered leading roles, like in Dynamite, 1929, but soon found himself working outside the studio mainstream, where roles were fewer but freedom was greater. In 1935, while filming East of Java, Bickford was attacked by a lion, an accident that nearly killed him and left permanent scars. The physical toll might have ended another actor's career, but for Bickford, it marked a turning point. He transitioned into character roles that demanded not beauty, but depth. His performances in The Song of Bernadette, Johnny Belinda, and The Farmer's Daughter earned him 3 Academy Award nominations and a reputation as one of Hollywood's most formidable supporting actors. When The Virginian brought him into the cast during its 5th season, Bickford was already in his 70s, yet still radiated strength. As John Granger, he wasn't just playing a ranch patriarch. He was the mountain the show leaned on. But his health was fragile. Only a few episodes into the role, he was hospitalized with pneumonia and passed away on November 9, 1967, at the age of 76. Charles Bickford never chased stardom. He stood firm, unvarnished, and deeply human, on screen and off. His loss was more than the passing of an actor. It was the end of a kind of presence Hollywood rarely sees anymore. J Cobb, Judge Garth. Born December 8, 1911, died February 11, 1976. There was a gravity to J Cobb that pulled every scene toward him. As Judge Henry Garth in The Virginian, he brought an intensity that wasn't performed, it was lived. He didn't need to raise his voice to assert power. You felt it in his stillness, in the steel behind his eyes. In a show built on moral codes and silent strength, Cobb played the man who wrote the code. But behind that unshakable presence was a career and a life, marked by conflict, conviction, and the search for redemption. Born Leo Jacoby in New York City's Lower East Side, Cobb was a prodigy, first in music, mastering violin and harmonica, before turning to acting. He made his stage debut at the Pasadena Playhouse, then returned east to build a formidable reputation in serious theater. His breakthrough came with the group theater in the 1930s, where he embraced roles that demanded emotional honesty and social weight. That commitment to realism became his signature. But the stage wasn't where Cobb would find immortality. It was in Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, where he created the definitive Willy Loman on Broadway, a performance that remains etched in American theater history. Cobb didn't just play broken men. He embodied them. With a hulking frame and a voice that could shift from tenderness to fury in a heartbeat, he gave every role the texture of lived experience. When he joined the Virginian in 1962, Cobb was already an established name in film and television. As Judge Garth, he anchored the first 4 seasons with a quiet but commanding presence. He wasn't the fastest gun or the most charming writer. He was the foundation, a father figure not only to the characters, but to the show itself. And yet, it was clear that television wasn't his natural home. Cobb had always been drawn to the emotional depths of the stage, and the Virginian, for all its grandeur, couldn't contain the full range of his artistry. After leaving the series in 1966, Cobb continued working in film and TV, taking on complex supporting roles in projects like The Exorcist, 1973, where he played Lieutenant Kinderman with sly intelligence and wearied compassion. It would be one of his last major roles. On February 11, 1976, he died of a heart attack at 64, sudden, quiet, and far too soon for a voice that still had so much to say. J. Cobb didn't chase likability. He didn't offer easy characters or polished charm. What he gave, instead, was truth, raw, often uncomfortable, always real. And in the fading echo of his voice, there's still a weight that refuses to disappear. Doug Mccclure, Trampas. Born May 11, 1935, died February 5, 1995. Doug Mccclure was the golden boy of the Virginian, sun-kissed, quick-witted, and endlessly likable. As Trampas, he brought energy and mischief to a series otherwise steeped in brooding silence. With his tousled blonde hair, roguish smile, and easy charisma, he became the beating heart of the show, charming audiences for 9 seasons and nearly 250 episodes. But beneath the charm was a man wrestling with shadows that followed him long after the cameras stopped. Born in Glendale, California, in 1935, Mccclure had California in his bones. He was athletic, handsome, and charismatic enough to be discovered early, first in modeling, then in film and television. Before the Virginian, he had already racked up a handful of credits in westerns and war dramas, but nothing stuck until Trampas. The role wasn't just a breakout, it became a second skin. He made the character larger than life, rowdy but loyal, playful but fearless, a man who could throw a punch, land a joke, and still hold your heart. Viewers adored him, and for a time, so did Hollywood. But the bright lights hid a more complicated reality. McClure's personal life was marred by instability. He married 5 times, struggled with drinking, and quietly fought battles that rarely made the tabloids, but always left their mark. Like many actors who became inseparable from a single role, he found it difficult to move on once the Virginian ended in 1971. He kept working, low-budget films, sci-fi adventures, TV guest roles, but the magic never fully returned. His career pivoted toward B-movies and genre fare in the 70s and 80s, and while some saw it as a step down, McClure embraced it with his usual sense of humor. He didn't see himself as a fallen star. He was a working actor, and he worked until his body gave out. In 1994, he made a final appearance in Maverick, a quiet nod to his legacy in the Western genre. By then, cancer had taken hold. He continued working through the pain, never letting on how sick he was. On February 5, 1995, he died of lung cancer. He was just 59. Doug Mccclure never won an Emmy, never got a statue, but he won something rarer, loyalty. From fans who saw themselves in Trampas. From peers who remembered his humor and humility. His death marked more than the passing of a TV cowboy. It marked the end of an era when charm and heart were enough to carry a show, and a man could ride across the screen like he belonged to the land itself. Doug Mccclure may be gone, but in every replay of the Virginian, he still rides, untamed, unforgettable. James Drury, the Virginian. Born April 18, 1934, died April 6, 2020. James Drury didn't just play the Virginian. He was the Virginian. With his piercing stare, deep voice, and commanding stillness, he gave life to a character without a name but full of presence. Across 9 seasons and nearly a decade on air, he anchored the series with unwavering authority. While others rode in and out of Shiloh Ranch, Drury remained the moral compass, the quiet strength that held everything together. His performance wasn't theatrical. It was lived in, deliberate, and unforgettable. Born in New York City in 1934, Drury was the son of a university professor, but spent much of his youth on a family ranch in Oregon, where he developed real skills on horseback. That authenticity would later define him. He studied drama at NYU and UCLA and entered Hollywood in the 1950s with roles in films for Disney and 20th Century Fox. He bounced between small television parts, Gunsmoke, Rawhide, Wagon Train, until fate came calling. In 1962, The Virginian premiered with James Drury in the lead role. Unlike other westerns of the time, this wasn't a half-hour or even hour-long series. It was a 90-minute epic, every episode a full-length story. And at its center stood Drury, playing a man known only by the title of the show. He was stoic but not cold, firm but never cruel. He embodied a type of integrity that felt timeless. While co-stars like Doug Mccclure brought humor and heart, Drury grounded the series in gravity and quiet resolve. But when the show ended in 1971, the industry moved on quickly. Drury, so closely associated with his role, found it hard to break free of that identity. He acted sporadically in later years, but never landed another major part. Instead, he turned his attention to ranching and later became a successful businessman in oil and natural gas. While his fame faded from headlines, he remained deeply connected to his fans, appearing at Western festivals well into his 70s, always in cowboy boots, always with time for those who remembered. He died of natural causes in Houston, Texas, on April 6, 2020, just days before his 86th birthday. His passing didn't make front-page news, but for those who understood what he meant to the American Western, it felt like the closing of a book we weren't ready to finish. James Drury wasn't flashy. He didn't burn out or break down. He simply stood tall, did the work, and rode off when the time came. And in a world that no longer makes cowboys like it used to, his silence speaks louder than ever. CLU Guliger, Deputy Emmett Riker. Born November 16, 1928. Died August 5, 2022. CLU Guliger didn't fit the mold of a traditional TV cowboy, and he never tried to. As Deputy Emmett Riker in The Virginian, he brought something volatile to the screen, a kind of restrained danger, a storm behind the eyes. His presence was sharp, unpredictable, and always compelling. In a world of stoic heroes and talkative sidekicks, Guliger carved out a space that was entirely his own, gritty, layered, and never easy to pin down. Born William Martin Guliger in Holdenville, Oklahoma, in 1928, he was part Cherokee and raised on the tough ground of a working ranch. After serving in the U.S. Marine Corps from 1946 to 1948, he used the GI Bill to study acting. It was clear from the start that Guliger had a different energy. He wasn't interested in polished charm. He preferred roles that burned from the inside. Early TV appearances showed his range, but it was The Virginian that gave him a lasting place in Western lore. Introduced in the show's 3rd season, Riker was no clean-cut deputy. Guliger gave him an edge, quiet, haunted, a man shaped by violence and restraint. He was a lawman, but barely contained, and that tension made him magnetic. Unlike many actors who softened for weekly television, Guliger brought cinematic intensity to the small screen. His scenes felt lived in, his silences dangerous. But even at the height of his Western fame, Guliger's path was never typical. After The Virginian, he grew disillusioned with TV and pivoted hard. In the 1980s, he re-emerged as an unlikely icon in horror cinema, starring in cult classics like The Return of the Living Dead and A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. His career, like his characters, refused to follow rules. He later acted in several independent horror films directed by his son, John Guliger, working into his 80s with the same raw edge that defined his youth. Guliger died in Los Angeles on August 5, 2022, at the age of 93. His passing was quiet, but his legacy is anything but. He never chased stardom, he chased truth. And whether he was wearing a badge or soaked in blood, he always made you look twice. CLU Guliger didn't play cowboys. He played men, flawed, fierce, unforgettable. Sarah Lane Elizabeth Granger. Born March 12, 1949, died March 3, 2023. In a world of hardened cowboys and gun-toting lawmen, Sarah Lane offered the Virginians something else: grace. As Elizabeth Granger, she didn't just soften the edges of Shiloh Ranch. She gave the series a beating heart. Blonde, poised, and sharp-eyed, she was more than a pretty face on the frontier. Her presence brought warmth without weakness, and vulnerability without fragility. She held her own, not through bravado, but with quiet resilience, a strength that mirrored her real life far more than many realized. Born Susan Russell Lane in New York City in 1949, she was the daughter of two performers, Broadway actor Rusty Lane and Sarah Anderson. The spotlight came early. As an infant, she appeared in ads and educational films, and by adolescence, she was doing commercials. But stardom was never her dream. Lane admitted she acted mainly to support her real passions: designing clothes, making jewelry, and raising horses. Acting was a means, not a calling. Still, fate had other plans. A photograph of her as a Miss Los Angeles teen semi-finalist caught the attention of a producer. That led to a role in I Saw What You Did, 1965, a thriller starring Joan Crawford. A year later, she was cast in The Virginian as Elizabeth Granger, the granddaughter of John Granger. At just 17, she joined one of television's most prominent westerns, and more than held her ground alongside industry veterans. Lane's natural writing skills made her a perfect fit. She did many of her own stunts, brought a real sense of ease to life on the ranch, and appeared in over 100 episodes between 1966 and 1970. But when the series ended, so did her desire to stay in Hollywood. She took on a few low-budget roles, briefly acted under the name Russell Lane, and then disappeared from the screen entirely. What followed was a second act far removed from television. Lane and her husband founded Haven's Winery in Napa Valley, building a respected brand known for its red blends. She turned her back on fame and chose creation instead. No spotlight, no press, just a quiet, fulfilled life. Sarah Lane passed away on March 3, 2023, after a battle with breast cancer. She was 73. Her departure didn't spark headlines, but for those who remember her, as Elizabeth, as a part of Shiloh Ranch, her absence was deeply felt. She didn't chase the frontier. She rode through it with dignity, then walked away when it no longer called. And that, in the end, is the mark of a woman who was never acting. She was simply being real. The Virginian was more than a television show. It was a testament to a time when storytelling rode on horseback, when justice spoke softly but hit hard, and when characters lingered in the hearts of viewers long after the credits rolled. It gave us heroes who didn't need to boast, who carried their burdens quietly, and who, on screen, seemed immortal. But off-screen, they were just men and women, flawed and fragile, chasing dreams while time quietly closed in. Charles Bickford, a granite figure shaped by pain and resilience, left too soon just as he redefined himself in a role built for his gravitas. J Cobb, the soul of intensity, carried the emotional depth of the show with a weariness that mirrored his own. Mccclure, all energy and charm, lit up the screen while battling private storms that dimmed his light far too early. Drury, the nameless cowboy who stood for everything good and just, disappeared into a life of quiet dignity after giving television one of its most enduring icons. CLU Guliger, the unpredictable firebrand, never played by the rules and kept reinventing himself until the end. And Sarah Lane, the heart of Shiloh Ranch, chose to walk away from fame and into a life she shaped on her own terms. They're gone now, all six, not with shootouts or grand farewells, but with silence, faded headlines, quiet obituaries, and memories stored in black and white footage. But if you look closely, they're still writing. In reruns, in grainy stills, in the hearts of those who grew up watching them. The trail doesn't end when the credits roll. Not for them. Not for us. If you want to keep following the stories that live behind the screen, the lives, the losses, the legends, subscribe to the channel. Because every icon leaves behind a shadow, and we're here to chase it.